Mr. Braddock, the calculus teacher at Eisenberg High in Elkhart, Indiana, made a light-hearted gesture, singling out the janitor for amusement in front of the class. However, when a man calmly approached the board and solved the problem with unexpected skill, the room fell silent, fundamentally altering the school's perception of him. This occurred during fourth period on a Thursday, a typical day at Eisenberg High where students often watch the clock more than the lesson. Mr. Braddock had a certain reputation. Known for his sharp wit, impatience, and sarcastic remarks, he was a figure who evoked tolerance rather than affection. The classroom felt stale. Equations covered the whiteboard. A subtle scent of eraser dust and old sneakers permeated the air. Phones lay hidden beneath desks. A few students feigned attention, while others gazed out the window. Then, an event occurred, altering the classroom's atmosphere dramatically. While Mr. Braddock wrote another derivative on the board, a quiet squeak drifted in from the hallway. The janitor was close by, mopping just outside the classroom with his characteristic slow, steady pace. Braddock stopped speaking, looked toward the door, and gave a slight smile. Suddenly, he turned to the class and indicated the hallway. "Look who's here," he said. "Tell me, do you think you can solve this one?" He struck the board with his marker, mimicking a game show challenge. A ripple of laughter followed, not loud, but the type that makes you subtly adjust your posture, unsure of its appropriateness. Mr. Braddock smiled knowingly. "Come on, Lamar." Lamar Dorsey, a 52-year-old janitor, stood in the hallway, holding his mop. The familiar blue uniform, clean but faded, was on him, displaying L. Dorsey embroidered above his chest pocket. He remained still, showing no reaction. His gaze swept across the room. Then, deliberately, he entered. A mop rested against the wall. Several students straightened. Some anticipated a clever remark or a sudden departure. Perhaps a jest or simply a walkout. However, that didn't happen. Instead, Lamar proceeded to the front of the room. "You mind?" he inquired quietly, indicating the board with a gesture. Braddock raised his brows. "Be my guest." Several phones silently emerged from backpacks. One girl whispered, "Is he serious?" But nobody interrupted Lamar. He picked up the marker, examined the equation, and paused, not because he was unsure, but as if he were considering something. Intensely, like someone studying a well-known map. He narrowed his eyes slightly. Then he began to write. There was no theatrics, no embellishment, just careful strokes, one line following another. The room became unnervingly quiet. The only sounds were the marker on the whiteboard and a chair creaking as someone leaned forward. Mr. Braddock crossed his arms, observing intently. His expression remained unchanged, though his jaw tightened. Lamar explained the steps aloud, his voice quiet and patient. "See, this here's a chain rule problem, but the trick is recognizing the inner function first. Once you isolate that, it becomes a lot cleaner." He moved with the ease of someone experienced, not just with the problem, but with the teaching. His manner was unassuming and not arrogant. He clarified matters straightforwardly, with clarity, as if he's dedicated more effort to instruction than to menial tasks. Upon completion, he secured the marker and retreated. The board displayed meticulous, well-structured work. He addressed Braddock, then the class. "That's one approach," he stated, and briefly, stillness reigned. A junior student in the rear murmured. He understood it correctly. Mr. Braddock remained silent. Not instantly. His mouth parted a little, but no words emerged. The silence became more pronounced than any joke he could have delivered. Lamar nodded politely and retreated to the door. He gathered his mop. There was no applause, no self-promotion, only that quiet assurance, as if he hadn't just dramatically altered the room. But as Lamar reached for the chalk, no one anticipated what would follow. No one stirred. For a complete 10 seconds, it felt as though the class had been pulled from a dream and placed into something authentic. The sort of moment that doesn't typically occur in a high school classroom. Lamar Dorsey, known as Mr. Dorsey, was in the process of leaving when a comment was made. Had he just thought that? It was Wes Hanley, a senior seated in the front row, who rarely spoke unless it concerned academic performance. He was completely serious. His eyes were wide with surprise. He glanced back at the board, as if the solution might have altered during a brief moment of closure. Braddock then spoke, his tone even and somewhat annoyed. He acknowledged that Mr. Dorsey had, nonetheless, provided the correct answer. His voice lacked its typical sarcasm. A different feeling seemed present, perhaps confusion, or even something like discomfort. Lamar looked back. "I worked with numbers extensively in the past," he stated, then offered a slight shrug. "They remain with me." Several students chuckled, not directed at him this time, but because the atmosphere was easing. Lamar didn't pause for a reply. He departed, mop in hand, his shoes squeaking quietly down the hallway, as if nothing had occurred. It was as if he hadn't just resolved a complex academic challenge in less than 3 minutes without using a calculator. That's when the phones appeared. Someone had recorded the entire incident. Carly Benson, a junior in the third row, had already begun editing the video before the school bell sounded. In the hallway between classes, the topic of conversation was solely focused on the event. "Did you see Mr. Dorsey?" Braddock's expression. He appeared as if someone had disconnected him. Where did he acquire that knowledge? It was believed he only cleaned floors. By lunchtime, the video appeared on TikTok and then Instagram. It was unedited, simply a shaky view of Lamar's hands working on the board, accompanied by a voice saying, "Yo, he's solving it." The text accompanying the video stated, "Our janitor just outperformed the calculus teacher." Some people found it amusing. Others observed it with disbelief. Nevertheless, the excitement continued to build. In the teacher's lounge, the atmosphere was similarly charged. "Are you suggesting he completed a full derivative chain problem mentally?" inquired Ms. Lin, the physics teacher. She had paused mid-bite of her sandwich, "And so did he," muttered Mr. Crane, the English teacher. "Didn't use notes. Didn't even pause. It was like muscle memory." Braddock was at the corner table, seemingly grading papers. He remained silent. However, Principal Everett spoke. He had been at the school for 6 years. It was surprising that no one knew he had an academic background. People shook their heads. Few people really knew much about Lamar. He arrived early. He left late. The floors were always clean. Light bulbs rarely failed within a day. The man worked in silence. However, he was no longer simply the man behind the mop. Down the hallway, a group of students waited near the janitor's closet. They weren't there to report a spill or request a broom. They simply wanted to speak with him. One student, a 12-year-old boy holding his geometry book, inquired, "Do you tutor Mr. Dorsey?" Lamar blinked. "I haven't in a long time," he replied. "You should," the boy suggested. That was a kind thing to say. Lamar chuckled, but it wasn't unkind. "I'm simply astonished." During the third period the following day, Braddock's demeanor had changed. He refrained from making jokes. He didn't call on students arbitrarily. He spoke with his gaze directed at the board, his voice more subdued than normal. It wasn't voiced directly, but it was obvious to all. Following the class, Wes approached him. "Mr. Braddock, regarding that incident with Mr. Dorsey yesterday, he employed the very method you demonstrated last week. The chain rule, correct?" Braddock nodded once. "That is correct. Only he articulated it more effectively." Braddock remained silent. However, the truly startling aspect wasn't the proposed solution itself. It was what Lamar said following it. Lamar Dorsey hadn't intended to create a disturbance. He generally avoided being the focus of attention. This had been the case since his youth. Consequently, when students began congregating near the maintenance closet simply to converse, or when teachers directed extended glances his way in the hallways, he felt uneasy. He lowered his gaze and continued with his regular activities. Restocking paper towels, repairing a leaky faucet in the boys' locker room, and cleaning cafeteria tables consumed his time. However, he began to notice a subtle change. There was a perceptible shift in how people regarded him, as if they were attempting to place him within a framework they hadn't previously recognized. This wasn't merely curiosity, it was a mixture of confusion, respect, and perhaps regret. The sensation made him uncomfortable. Later that afternoon, Principal Everett requested that he visit the front office. He entered, still wearing his gloves, his uniform slightly damp from cleaning the cafeteria sinks. He took off his cap as a gesture of respect. Everett leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together. Lamar, may I ask you a question? Do you have experience in education or engineering? Lamar paused. He glanced downwards briefly, as if revisiting a long-forgotten aspect of himself. I attended Purdue, he said softly. Mechanical engineering. Full scholarship. The principal leaned back, eyebrows raised. You serious? Was Lamar's reply. He had plans. Things got complicated, and for the first time in a long while, he began to recount the story. He'd grown up in Gary, Indiana. A bright young man, he's always been fascinated by how things worked. Motors, pulleys, anything he could take apart and put back together. His mother, Estelle, raised him and his two sisters on her own. She worked overtime at a textile plant and still found time to read to them every night. She held a deep conviction that education offered the sole path to advancement, frequently stating, books first, always. She explained that the world might attempt to deny opportunity, but possessing your own key ensured access. Lamar secured that key. He was valedictorian, a winner at the state science fair, and then received a scholarship to Purdue. During his freshman year, he was already tutoring fellow students. Instructors noticed his name on the attendance roster and took note. However, sophomore year brought a life-altering phone call. His mother had collapsed at work. Medical professionals diagnosed her with advanced cancer. When Lamar arrived at the hospital, she was struggling to remain conscious. I can handle this, she murmured. He disregarded her request and did not return home. He took a semester off from school, then another. He found employment, working in a warehouse and doing overnight shifts at a grocery store. He worked to cover expenses. Academic pursuits became less important. So did the dream. When his mother died, possessions were disorganized. He lacked a place to return to, lacked funds to complete his degree, and received no communication from a guidance counselor checking on his absence. I repeatedly thought I would return to school, Lamar told Everett. But one situation led to another. Life doesn't wait for anyone. The principal remained silent. The narrative carried weight, not melodrama. It was simply authentic, the sort of existence one rarely encounters unless actively inquired about. At his residence, Lamar stored his academic records in a box situated beneath his bed. He possessed a faded Purdue sweatshirt, an antique calculator, and a photograph of himself and his mother from orientation day. He had not used any of these items, yet he kept them. Now they were being revisited. That evening, he was seated on the rear steps of his modest apartment complex. The sky was dusky, with a stillness punctuated only by the distant murmur of vehicles. He drank tea from a metal thermos and gazed into the distance. It had been years since he's considered calculus. It had been a while since his last tutoring job, before he left school, and now it reappeared, like a familiar face at his door. But a single choice threatened to undo all his efforts. While in college, Lamar had vowed to take a brief respite, stabilize his family situation, and then complete his education successfully. However, life rarely follows plans, particularly those founded on hope. Following his mother's passing, Lamar went back to Gary, attempting to rebuild. His sisters were still in high school, struggling to manage. Bills accumulated on the counter. The landlord demanded rent, and no one from Purdue contacted him to inquire about his disappearance. He accepted any available work. He worked as a stockroom loader, a janitor at a strip mall, and provided overnight security at a shipping yard. Anything that provided sufficient income to pay the electricity bill. His education receded further and further from his immediate concerns. Initially, he would occasionally contact the university to inquire about reapplying and transferring credits. Forms were sent to him. He completed them. However, he didn't mail them. There was always an obstacle. Then came a critical moment. It occurred in late November. A man named Frank Booker, the owner of a flooring company in South Bend, had offered Lamar consistent employment. "You're capable," he stated. "Don't squander your time sweeping floors. I'll personally train you." Lamar felt hopeful again, having a genuine opportunity. However, the day before his start date, his youngest sister, Alana, was involved in a school altercation. a disagreement that quickly worsened. She had injured someone's nose. Expulsion was threatened. Lamar felt compelled to be present. No one else would support her. Consequently, he missed his first day at the flooring job. Frank reassigned the position to another person. And that was the end of it. An opportunity was lost. He relinquished his pursuit of dreams and instead prioritized stability. Years passed indistinctly. He moved from town to town, holding various jobs. He maintained a clean record and avoided legal issues, simply focusing on survival. Quietly. When he reached Elkhart in his early 40s, he wasn't seeking a fresh start. He simply wanted a reliable income. The school district provided benefits. Summers were peaceful. He accepted the janitor position without hesitation. He found it agreeable in his own way. It was predictable. The work was clean. Students left him undisturbed. Teachers offered polite smiles. He didn't anticipate friendship or belonging. He didn't require it. He remained inconspicuous. He cleaned up messes and vanished before the last bell rang. Yet, numbers remained with him. Occasionally, after successfully completing a math course, he would briefly observe the board. He'd see a formula and mentally solve it. It felt akin to muscle memory, a facet of his mind that remained keen even as other aspects succumbed to the weight of habit. He would return home, prepare a simple supper, grilled fish, brown rice, perhaps some carrots, and peruse a vintage engineering book he stored behind the cereal boxes, just to confirm his abilities. He invariably did. He simply lacked an opportunity to demonstrate them. Then Mr. Braddock addressed him that day. And now, changes were occurring, not only at school, but also within him. He reflected on the students who waited outside his supply closet with questions. He thought about Wes Hanley visiting that morning with a folded piece of paper and saying, "Mr. Dorsey, I attempted to solve that same problem. Could you review it for me?" And Lamar had, with care, methodically. He clarified where Wes had made a mistake without causing embarrassment. Wes smiled when he finally grasped the concept. It wasn't solely a matter of pride. It was about a sense of belonging. That feeling lingered. However, not everyone reacted positively. Braddock, in particular, became unusually reserved. Students observed it. Teachers observed it. The experience of being surpassed by someone he hadn't previously considered a significant figure in front of his class clearly affected him. He didn't respond aggressively. Instead, his responses became more abrupt, his tolerance diminished. Any mention of Lamar in the lounge was swiftly redirected. He was not accustomed to being overshadowed, especially not by someone who had been unknown to him until now. But life held one more surprise, and this one brought him back to mathematics. The video didn't remain within Eisenberg High. It spread beyond. It began with a local student page reposting it, accompanied by the caption, "When your janitor turns out to be smarter than your teacher." Then it appeared on a regional education forum. By the weekend, it had spread across state lines. People online were astonished. They weren't mocking Lamar, they were impressed. He explained it with greater clarity than my college professor. Someone should give this man a classroom and a chalkboard, not a mop. It's a reminder that you never know someone's story. By Monday morning, Lamar had no idea any of this was occurring. He didn't use social media. He still had a flip phone. When he arrived at work, the first thing he did was repair a jammed paper towel dispenser in the girls' bathroom, just like he always did on Mondays. But something felt different. Conversations stopped as he passed. Students nodded, not out of duty, but with an unusual sense of respect. Some even smiled, as if meeting him for the first time. "Hey, Mr. Dorsey," a girl called out as he neared the library. "You're kind of famous now." Lamar chuckled quietly. However, when he rounded the corner, Wes Hanley was there, accompanied by two other students. One held a calculus book. A problem was indicated, marked in pink. "Would you mind going through this with us?" Wes asked. Lamar looked around, seemingly confused. "You got a free period?" Someone inquired. We made time. And so, in the hallway, surrounded by lockers and science fair posters, Lamar sat down on the floor with three teenagers and guided them through a multivariable equation. Step by step, line by line. He didn't lecture them. He engaged with them. It wasn't boisterous or extravagant, but a significant moment unfolded. Further down the hallway, someone recorded the incident. Lamar wasn't informed. He likely would have disapproved. Returning to the office, Principal Everett was speaking with a member of the local school board. Affirming the information, she stated, Lamar Dorsey. He's been with us for 6 years. No, he's not faculty. He's a custodian. She hesitated, then responded, well, I wouldn't describe it as unorthodox. I'd say it was overlooked. Simultaneously, in the teacher's lounge, Braddock was reviewing an email shared by a parent containing a link to the now viral video. He closed the laptop without watching it. That afternoon, Everett called Lamar back in, offered him a seat. Lamar stayed standing. I've got a request from the board, the principal said. They want to know if you'd be interested in running an after-school tutoring program. Small group, voluntary, just a trial run. Lamar didn't answer right away. You'd be paid, of course, Everett added. This isn't about changing your existing responsibilities, but rather expanding them. Reflecting on the skills he still possesses, Lamar glanced at his hands. They were calloused, clean, and worn. I haven't taught in a long time, he stated. You haven't ceased to know, Everett responded. Lamar raised his gaze. There was no strain evident in the man's tone, only a straightforward suggestion. I will consider it, he said. That evening, he retrieved the aged cardboard box from beneath his bed. It contained the Purdue sweatshirt, the transcripts, and the orientation photo. He hadn't touched it in years. He spread everything out on the table. The paper had yellowed slightly. The edges were curled, but the words remained. That was the nature of knowledge. It didn't fade. It simply waited. He didn't need to become popular online. He didn't care about the views or the comments. But knowing he could still make a difference resonated with him. However, while some were impressed, others were not pleased by his growing recognition. As Lamar gained more recognition, the school environment started to change. This transformation initially manifested in the student body. Those who previously ignored him in the hallways began to greet him. Some even sought his assistance with homework during class breaks. Within 2 weeks, a small group of students had informally established what they termed Dorsey sessions. After school, they would gather in the library, notebooks ready, concentrating as Lamar elucidated ideas with a surprising clarity that everyone acknowledged. Soon, teachers noticed. Ms. Lynn, the physics teacher, was the first to visit the library and observe him assisting the students. You possess a talent, she remarked gently, and it's not limited to calculations. However, not all reactions were positive. Mr. Braddock had remained silent regarding Lamar since the initial event. Within the teacher's lounge, he presented an outward appearance of normalcy. However, his silences betrayed a lingering bitterness. His speech was concise and abrupt. He avoided direct eye contact with Lamar and never referenced calculus. During a parent-teacher meeting, when Lamar's increasing impact on the students was discussed, Braddock stated, "It's good they're interested in math. Let's just make sure we don't blur the line between instruction and inspiration." While seemingly courteous, the underlying tone was unmistakable to everyone present. The principal didn't ignore the situation. He summoned Braddock to his office one morning and explained the issue directly. "I know it was difficult," Everett remarked, "but Lamar didn't shame you. He motivated them," Braddock conceded, adjusting in his chair. "He may lack formal credentials, but he's educated significantly more than we initially understood. And crucially, he's connecting with students in a manner that we haven't been able to." Braddock started to speak, then stopped. There was little to add. Lamar continued with his established schedule. He didn't request an official position. He didn't desire any preferential consideration. However, when Principal Harding suggested a small payment to continue the tutoring sessions, he agreed. The motivation wasn't financial, it simply felt appropriate. Consequently, he began carrying a small binder. Within it were pages of problems, blank worksheets, and notes he'd written by hand. During breaks, he'd sit in the back corner of the cafeteria and jot down formulas from memory, sometimes acknowledging a student who'd call out, "Hey, Mr. D." One afternoon, Carly, the student who filmed the original clip, approached him near the vending machines. "Did you ever want to be a teacher?" she asked. Lamar paused before replying. "I want to build things. Teach later, maybe, but life had different ideas." Carly responded, handing him a new mechanical pencil. "I think you're doing both now." He smiled. Thank you. However, beneath this pleasantness, there was underlying tension. Some parents had begun contacting the school. While the response was largely positive, a single, anonymous concern reached the board. The question raised was whether it was appropriate for a janitor to tutor students within the school. Concerns were also voiced regarding his certification and background checks for instruction. Everett addressed the matter promptly. He is a district employee and has not acted inappropriately. It was suggested that if genuine concern was the driver, a direct conversation with me would have occurred. He did not inform Lamar about the complaint. Nevertheless, Lamar sensed a subtle tension present. Some individuals seemed unsure how to perceive him now that he no longer blended into the periphery. Then, one afternoon, Braddock took an unexpected action. He entered the library during one of Lamar's tutoring sessions. He observed silently from a distance as Lamar explained integrals to a group of 4 students. After roughly 10 minutes, he approached. "Do you mind if I sit in?" Braddock inquired. Lamar looked up. His expression remained unchanged. He gestured toward a chair. The students laughed, just enough to lighten the moment. Braddock smirked. For once, it wasn't mean. They sat together that day, saying little, but it was a start. Lamar Dorsey wasn't interested in titles. He had something else in mind. It wasn't about proving anything anymore. For Lamar Dorsey, standing at the whiteboard in the library with students gathered around, it was never about redemption or revenge. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He didn't seek recognition. He simply showed up for them, the kids, the ones who reminded him of the boy he once was. Every Tuesday and Thursday, right after the final bell, that corner of the library filled with chatter, questions, scribbled notes, and wide eyes as Lamar walked students through math problems they once feared. Not because he possessed all the answers, but because he helped them believe they could discover those answers themselves. That's what mattered. Isaiah, a freshman who previously struggled with algebra last semester, is now confidently solving quadratic equations. Tasha, who once disliked math, is now conducting brief study groups on weekends for her cousins, utilizing notes from Lamar. Lamar didn't lecture from the front of the room like a conventional teacher. Instead, he sat alongside his students, engaged in conversation, and posed questions before providing answers. Consequently, an increasing number of teachers began visiting. They weren't there to monitor, but simply to observe his methods. Ms. Lynn inquired about utilizing some of his explanations in her class. Coach Rivera asked if Lamar would assist in establishing a summer preparation group for incoming freshmen. Even Braddock, typically hesitant and prideful, began visiting frequently. While not every day, he visited often enough. He would quietly suggest a couple of additional problems and eventually started offering words of encouragement to the students. The sharpness in his voice lessened. A change occurred within him, softening his demeanor. During one tutoring session, Braddock stayed behind after the students had departed. "You know," he remarked, glancing at the board, "I once believed this position conferred significance upon me. That teaching provided authority." Lamar remained silent. "But you're showing me what it truly involves, consistently being present and ensuring that each moment has value." Lamar simply nodded in agreement. Everyone occasionally strays from their path. He was not one to bear resentment. He had no need to. Principal Everett summoned him again a month later. A suggestion was put forward to establish his sessions as a non-credit elective class next semester, designed for enrichment and to build students' confidence. Everett cautioned that we would need to navigate some administrative processes. Lamar responded, shaking his head gently, and stated that he appreciated the offer but did not require the formal recognition. He preferred to maintain a simple approach, encouraging attendance based on genuine interest rather than a fixed schedule. Everett agreed, nodding, and assured him that they would provide support in any way possible. News of his efforts extended past the school district. A reporter from a local news outlet visited to conduct an interview. Lamar chose to keep his comments brief, avoiding sensationalism and self-promotion. "I'm simply demonstrating what they already possess," he stated. "Sometimes it requires a bit of time to recognize it." In the spring, Eisenberg High held its yearly student showcase, featuring science projects, art displays, and choir performances. In one corner of the gym, a booth called Dorsey's Table showcased student reflections on math, life, and confidence. Many students wrote about how Lamar had helped them discover more about themselves. This wasn't because he provided answers, but because he listened and showed belief. By the end of the night, people had stopped asking, "Is he the janitor?" Instead, they were saying, "That's Mr. Dorsey." He didn't wear a suit. He didn't give a speech. He stood near the table, smiled, and expressed gratitude to the students who approached. Afterwards that evening, returning to his apartment, he retrieved the well-worn Purdue sweatshirt from the box beneath his bed. He refrained from wearing it. Instead, he folded it carefully, placed it inside a fresh storage container, and added a file containing student thank you notes alongside it. He understood that legacy isn't defined by positions. It's about the impact you create in others. He didn't require completing school to instruct. He didn't need a degree to guide. He simply needed to be present each day and demonstrate genuine care. And that's precisely what he intended to continue. Thank you for hearing Lamar's story. If it resonated with you, if it brought to mind someone you may have underestimated or someone who offered you support, please subscribe and share it with someone who could benefit from it. Because sometimes the most brilliant intellects reside in the most unassuming environments. The CEO, known for his quiet demeanor, entered his own dealership incognito. What he overheard a salesman say to a struggling single mother abruptly halted him and initiated an unforeseen sequence of events. Derek Belton appeared unremarkable, certainly not the person who authorized salaries for 137 employees. He wasn't wearing a blazer, didn't carry a briefcase, and he arrived without a driver. That morning, he wore faded Levi's, well-worn sneakers, and a Tennessee Titans cap shading his face. He would be unrecognizable, even to the regional manager he had dined with 2 Fridays prior. He parked his black 2011 Honda Accord a short distance away. It wasn't a necessity. He possessed the means for a garage full of luxury vehicles. However, today was not about displays of wealth. He walked the additional block quietly, noticing the texture of the pavement with each footfall. As the dealership appeared, the signage, crisp and prominent, displaying Belton Auto Group across the glass, caused him to hesitate. His name. But what was happening beneath the surface? The concerns had initially surfaced as quiet remarks. A customer in Murfreesboro reported being sold an extended warranty she didn't comprehend. A family in Franklin alleged their monthly payment differed from the agreed-upon amount. These were minor issues. However, they caused Derek to question things. This location in Charlotte, Tennessee had consistently been a high-volume dealership. It specialized in mid-range vehicles and enjoyed strong sales. People trusted this dealership, or they once did. The showroom doors opened as he entered. The air held the scent of coffee and Armor All. A bell chimed above him, yet no one acknowledged it. Derek surveyed the area. There were 3 sales desks and 2 salesmen engaged in conversation by the corner water cooler. A woman managed the reception desk, absorbed in her phone. He appeared unremarkable, and that was his intention. He began his assessment in the service bay. It was quiet, the technicians working diligently, focused on their tasks. He observed nothing unusual. He proceeded through the customer waiting area, observing a man browse a magazine as his daughter entertained herself on a damaged iPad. He received no assistance. There was no greeting, not even a simple acknowledgement. He approached the line of Camrys situated near the glass wall. A couple stood close by, engaged in a conversation with a salesman whose speech was rapid and overly enthusiastic. The older man appeared displeased. The woman seemed bothered. "Sir," the salesman stated, "you won't locate a more advantageous offer anywhere. This item is covered by warranty and has seen minimal use. However, I can offer this price only if we finalize the agreement today." "That's the current situation," Derek mentioned. He recognized this as a tactic he hadn't been taught and made a note to himself. He then proceeded around a corner close to the used inventory office and paused. A young woman, likely in her late 20s, wearing a light jacket and carrying a baby in a carrier, was speaking with a man in a navy blazer. She appeared anxious, repeatedly looking down at a well-worn envelope she held. It likely contained pay stubs or a bank statement. The salesman presented himself with an assured, perhaps overly confident, demeanor, speaking with charm and certainty. "You're receiving full coverage for the first 3 years?" the salesman stated. "Bumper to bumper plus powertrain. If anything breaks, even the air conditioning, it's covered." That was inaccurate, and the $895 fee I referenced, that's standard practice. We apply that to all our transactions. It covers a comprehensive pre-delivery inspection, interior cleaning, and anti-theft VIN etching. Derek paused. VIN etching? That practice had been removed from the dealership's process 3 years prior. And warranty coverage? No, that wasn't consistent with the terms. He had personally revised those contracts to ensure greater honesty and transparency. His pulse decelerated. He retreated a step back, out of their line of sight, heart pounding, but not from anger. It was disappointment. This was his business. This was his name. And this man was deceiving, with ease, a woman who appeared to have saved every cent to be present. Derek wasn't prepared to show himself. Not yet. He needed to observe the situation's extent. Derek moved discreetly behind a row of brochures close to the finance office, watching unseen. The woman nodded slowly in response to the salesman's words. Her fingers closed more firmly around the envelope. The baby in the carrier shifted and emitted a quiet whimper, but she seemed largely unaware. She was attempting to remain calm, likely assessing how closely the figures aligned with her budget. The salesman leaned in, lowering his voice. "You don't need to worry," he said. "People get nervous about credit checks, but I know how to navigate the process. I'll get you into a vehicle today, even if we have to be resourceful." She hesitated, her eyes flicking toward the exit. But the salesman kept his tone steady, reassuring. Too smooth, too confident, Derek clenched his jaw, then turned away. He didn't want her to feel observed. He walked towards the far end of the showroom, where a teenage boy was standing near a pre-owned SUV. A salesman passed him twice, without a greeting or any offer of assistance. He simply walked by. Derek moved next to the boy. "You're considering this one?" he asked. The teen looked over, seemingly a little taken aback. "Yeah, possibly. My aunt is outside. She asked me to check it out while she parks." Derek nodded. "Do you know what kind of engine it has?" The kid shrugged. "Not really. She simply requires a secure environment. Her vehicle malfunctioned last week, another incident. Another customer was missed. It was hurtful, not due to the lost transaction, but because it confirmed everything for Derek. At some point, they had ceased to listen, stopped acknowledging individuals. And it wasn't just a single problematic employee. It was a prevailing attitude, a recurring behavior. He proceeded towards the reception desk. The woman still hadn't looked up. She tapped her screen, chewing her gum, scrolling. Derek positioned himself in front of her, simply to gauge the situation. 10 seconds elapsed. Then 20. At last, she raised her head and blinked. "Oh, do you have an appointment?" "No," Derek replied calmly. "Just browsing." She responded with a languid smile, gesturing vaguely towards the floor. "They'll get to you." They did not. For the subsequent 30 minutes, Derek moved between various departments. The only assistance he received came from a young lot attendant named Trevor, who appeared to be no older than 19. He noticed Derek close to the service entrance and offered, "Sir, do you need anything? We have water inside. I can get you a brochure if you're interested in the new hybrids." Derek smiled and replied, "I'm good. Thank you." He then asked, "What's your name?" Trevor responded, "Trevor." "Do you like it here, Trevor?" Trevor paused. "It's all right. People can be rude. Not just customers, but sometimes managers too. I prefer to keep to myself." "Do they treat customers fairly?" Trevor looked down. Most of the time. There was no bitterness in his tone. Derek placed a reassuring hand on the kid's shoulder. "Be careful who teaches you what," he advised. Trevor looked at him, then nodded. Before Derek could say anything further, a familiar laugh came from the glass hallway. Brent Collar, the salesman, was now leading the young mother toward a side office. Her name tag said Brent Collar. She appeared overwhelmed, holding her papers tightly. Derek kept a discreet distance as he watched. Brent paused before the office door, retrieved paperwork from a file, and announced, "Here's the first quote. It's going to appear high initially, but please don't worry. I'll adjust it once I input your information into the system. This is our standard procedure." Derek moved nearer, feigning interest in a flyer on the wall. From his position, he observed the quote. The figures were inflated. Listed were charges for warranty, dealership fees, VIN etching, and a maintenance guarantee, all non-standard and unapproved. This was everything Derek had worked to eliminate years prior. Brent, however, did not appear to be a person apprehensive about disregarding regulations. He presented as someone who believed no one was observing. Brent indicated for the woman to take a seat. She settled into the chair, moving her baby's carrier to the floor nearby. The little girl made a soft whimpering sound and kicked gently, yet Brent did not even look down. His gaze remained focused on the documents he held, turning pages, emphasizing sections, and drawing circles. Each action appeared rehearsed, refined, and routine. "We're going to structure this to ensure your monthly payment stays under $350, he stated. The woman offered a slow, cautious nod. "What's your name again?" he inquired, barely looking up. "Monique," she replied. "Monique Ellis." Derek stood just outside the office, back against the wall, feigning interest in the certified pre-owned display. He overheard every word. Brent smiled. "All right, Monique. You're going to love this. You're approved for a 2019 Corolla. Excellent condition, low mileage. That's a significant advantage. We remain committed to your protection. Therefore, we're providing a 3-year full coverage plan. This includes everything from the engine to the electronics. Roadside assistance is also included should you lock your keys in the car. That level of peace of mind? Priceless." Derek's hand slowly curled into a fist by his side. However, there was no such plan, not like Brent described it. And the quote, the one he'd caught a glimpse of earlier, had extra charges tucked in every margin. Some of them were outright fiction. Monique adjusted in her chair. "So, is all of that included in the price?" Brent offered a warm, reassuring smile. "It's all part of your protection package. We simply itemize it separately on the form. This simplifies things for the finance office." He continued, speaking rapidly and with excessive confidence, gesturing with a pen as if performing a magic trick. He even produced a calculator to minimize the appearance of the payment amount. For example, without the package, your monthly cost would be $384. With the included safeguard, the price reduces to $349. More manageable, isn't it? Derek scrutinized the figures. That calculation appeared illogical. It seemed like a deceptive tactic. He couldn't fathom how Brent maintained his composure. But it was evident this wasn't his first presentation. Then Monique posed a question that silenced the room. Do you believe I could return tomorrow?" she inquired softly. "I simply want to ensure I fully grasp everything first." Brent's demeanor subtly altered, a nearly imperceptible change. His jaw tightened briefly. However, he quickly regained his composure, adopting a more affable tone. "I completely understand," he said smoothly. "But the situation is that this car has 2 other potential buyers. One of them test drove it earlier today. I can't guarantee it will still be available tomorrow. You wouldn't want to miss out because of a minor consideration, would you?" Monique blinked. Her fingers shifted around her envelope. Brent quietly lowered his voice, leaning closer. "Listen, I've witnessed individuals leave, intending to consider it further overnight. Then the car was gone, and they were facing a situation that was more difficult and costly. You deserve something better, and this is it." He pushed the documents across to her. That was the end of it. Derek entered the office, maintaining a calm but resolute tone. "That doesn't sound like the protection plan we provide," Brent said, blinking. Monique turned to Derek, appearing surprised. Brent quickly regained his composure. "Pardon me?" Derek repeated. "The plan you're describing doesn't exist, not in that form." Brent lifted an eyebrow, assessing Derek. "Do you work here?" "Something like that." Brent chuckled dryly. "Look, I don't know who you are, but I've been here for 4 years. I know the packages inside and out." Derek pointed to the quote. "Show me where it says full electronics coverage. Show me where VAR and etching is required. Show me the breakdown." Brent hesitated. "It's in the system. Finance will explain it better. No, Derek said flatly. You explain it right now. Monique rose slowly in front of her, holding her baby close. Brent's face flushed. I don't have to deal with this. You're not even. But he stopped speaking. The general manager had just appeared behind Derek, his eyes wide. Mr. Belton, the manager said. Brent's mouth dropped open. Derek didn't smile, didn't say a word. He turned toward Monique. I'm sorry, he said softly. This isn't how we treat people. Not here, not under my name. But this wasn't over, not yet. The repercussions extended beyond a single falsehood. The room seemed to contract the instant the name, Mebleton, was spoken. Brent's complexion turned ashen. His assured demeanor disappeared, as if it were vapor on a chilled surface. Monique looked back and forth between the two men, bewildered, still cradling her baby, uncertain of the situation she's entered. Derek subtly turned to the general manager, standing in the doorway. He requested a conference room, speaking softly. Jeff Lorman, the manager, a man with a flushed face, nodded and indicated a hallway located at the rear of the showroom. Derek turned to Monique and spoke in a quiet, reassuring voice. Please come with me. I want to correct this. She paused briefly, then followed. Her movements were deliberate but hesitant. The baby began to stir again, perhaps reacting to the palpable tension. As they passed the workstations, the entire level appeared to become silent. Telephones ceased their ringing, and conversations were interrupted. Several employees glanced over their workstations and angled towards one another, speaking quietly. Trevor, the lot attendant from earlier, positioned himself close to the entrance and offered Derek a knowing look, but remained silent. Within the compact, glass-enclosed conference room, Derek drew out a chair for Monique and settled opposite her. Jeff entered behind them, appearing noticeably uneasy. Brent followed, attempting to seem unconcerned but without success. He folded his arms and rested against the distant wall. Derek took the folder Brent had put on the table. Is this the quote you gave her? He asked, not looking up. Brent moved slightly. Yes. Derek opened the folder, laid out the pages, and circled several numbers with a pen from the table's holder. Explain these, he said. Brent sat up straighter. Look, I don't know why I'm being questioned. Explain them, Brent paused. He looked at Jeff, hoping for support, but Jeff avoided his gaze. I mean, those are standard charges. Everyone includes them. Do you have documentation showing these fees were authorized? Derek inquired. They should be in the system. No, they aren't, Derek replied, his voice gaining strength. I was involved in revising the system. That VIN etching fee? It was discontinued in 2021. Powertrain coverage? It's limited to 5 years, not the comprehensive coverage you advertised. You added more than $2,000 in fabricated fees to a customer who came here simply trying to purchase a secure vehicle for her baby. Monique's hands trembled a little as she listened, but she did not speak. Her gaze remained on the document. You stated the payment would be $349, Dara proceeded. That is achievable only if she provides a down payment you failed to disclose. Furthermore, the interest rate you presented to her is inflated by a minimum of 2.5%. You are not just misleading Brent, you are being dishonest. Brent moved away from the wall and straightened. I have consistently met my quarterly goals. Customers leave satisfied. I understand sales, all right? Derek moved closer. You know how to apply undue influence. A distinction exists. Jeff finally spoke. Derek, I didn't know he was doing all that, I swear. We've been busy and the numbers have been good. That's exactly the problem, Derek interjected. You cared about the numbers, I cared about the people. Monique rose then, slowly, her face flushed with embarrassment and anger. I thought this was a good place, she said quietly. I really thought this was different. Derek turned to her. It was supposed to be, and I'm sorry it wasn't. He reached into his back pocket, retrieved his wallet, and produced a card. This is my direct line. I will personally ensure you receive a fair deal. If you desire the car, you'll obtain it at the correct price, free of unnecessary complications. She accepted the card deliberately. Thank you, she said. We'll have someone else manage the paperwork, Derek added. Someone who doesn't fabricate figures. Brent's arms fell to his sides. Clean out your desk, Derek stated. rising. "You are terminated here." There was no room for discussion. You were aware of that, yet disregarded it. Brent didn't object further. He left abruptly, speaking quietly to himself. No one pursued him. Derek addressed Jeff. "We aren't finished talking either," he stated. "I'll see you in your office in 10. Subsequently, he held the door for Monique and guided her back towards the lobby. People glanced around. Conversations began anew, subdued and apprehensive. Derek remained silent until they arrived at the reception desk. He regarded the woman seated there. "Did you greet her upon her arrival?" The receptionist hesitated, then swallowed. "I don't recall." Derek slowly shook his head. "Begin to recall, or begin searching." However, dismissing a single employee wouldn't resolve the underlying issues. Derek recognized that a cultural shift was necessary, or the company would decline from within. Derek was seated alone in Jeff Lorman's office, gazing out at the dealership floor through the blinds. A heavy silence filled the room. From behind the closed door, the usual showroom sounds had resumed. The usual sounds filled the office: casual chatter, the click of footsteps on tile, and ringing phones. However, a new feeling now permeated the atmosphere, a sense of unease. He glanced up as Jeff entered, his movements uncertain. The man appeared diminished, as if suddenly aware of his oversight. Jeff took a seat without prompting. "I was unaware," he said softly. "I truly swear to you, Derek, I wasn't aware Brent was engaging in that activity." "But you were aware of something," Derek responded. "You knew complaints were increasing. You were aware that deals were becoming more competitive. You were also aware that customer satisfaction scores decreased last quarter, and you attributed it to the surveys used." Jeff remained silent. Derek moved forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "What happened to what we created here?" he asked. "I thought we were performing well," Jeff stated. "The numbers were strong. Staff turnover was minimal. I assumed perhaps the industry simply shifted slightly." "The industry didn't shift," Derek responded, maintaining a calm tone. "We did. We lost sight of why people initially came here. We ceased prioritizing customer relationships and began focusing on achieving sales targets." Jeff sighed, massaging his face. "So what's the plan?" "We need a thorough overhaul," Derek stated. "And that extends beyond dismissing Brent. I require a review of every transaction from the past 90 days. Reimburse any clients where the terms weren't transparently conveyed. Furthermore, I want individual meetings with each salesperson. I need to understand their training processes, the priorities they receive, and to identify anyone else who believes it's acceptable to deceive customers with a friendly demeanor." Jeff acknowledged slowly. "And one more thing," Derek added, "I want Trevor in my office next week." Jeff blinked. "The lot kid?" Derek replied, "Yeah, he's one of the only ones who looked a customer in the eye today." "That matters." A knock at the door interrupted them. The receptionist appeared, visibly nervous. "Mr. Belton, the customer, Monique Ellis, is still in the lounge," she said. "She said she's waiting for her ride." Derek stood. "Please get her a bottle of water and offer her a seat in the private lounge, away from the plastic chairs near the vending machine. Make sure she feels valued." The receptionist acknowledged promptly and went to attend to the request. Derek returned to the showroom. Several employees glanced up, but there was no conversation. Some consciously avoided eye contact. Monique was situated in the far corner, her baby now asleep in the carrier beside her. She appeared weary, not only physically, but also emotionally drained. He approached her gently. "This is a lot," he admitted. "More than you anticipated," she replied with a gentle smile. "I've faced tougher situations," he stated. "I understand that, but you shouldn't have had to experience this," she said, shrugging. "People deceive me frequently. It happens at work, in shops, and even at the clinic. I'm accustomed to it." That comment resonated more deeply than he anticipated. "You shouldn't be exposed to that. Certainly not here. That's my responsibility." She then focused on him, truly observing him. "Why did you come in today? Why are you dressed like that?" Derek offered a soft smile. She stifled a quiet chuckle, noting people rarely shared the full truth with the man in the suit. He then presented her with a small folder. "If you're still interested in that car, these are the accurate figures. There are no hidden details. I had our finance manager verify them directly. Furthermore, we've included a year of service maintenance at no cost. Her eyebrows rose in surprise. Why? He replied, because someone needs to remind this place of its values. Shortly after, a silver hatchback, distinguished by a missing hubcap, arrived to take her away. Her sister signaled from the driver's seat. Monique rose, corrected the carrier, and glanced back at Derek. "Don't let them ruin what you built," she said. "I won't," he replied. She exited without a backward look. But restoring Monique's confidence was not the only task. It involved rebuilding the confidence of every person who had ever entered those doors. Derek returned 3 days later. This time, there was no disguise, no cap, no jeans. He was dressed in a tailored navy suit and entered through the front doors as if he belonged. And in truth, he did. This wasn't intended as a display of dominance. It was a matter of responsibility. The entire staff had received notification that morning. Scheduled meetings were canceled, and phone lines were redirected to voicemail. The dealership remained open, but no sales transactions would occur prior to 11 a.m. Derek had arranged a company-wide meeting, and every employee attended, including those on part-time shifts. The group assembled in the break room, squeezed together amongst vending machines and aged chairs. Several were leaning against the walls. Trevor stood toward the rear, his arms crossed, but attentive. Jeff was seated near the front, a notebook open but unused. Derek addressed them, speaking plainly without a microphone or podium. "I established this company in 2004, he began, not through investors or a franchise agreement, but with a used car lot situated behind a barbecue joint in Murfreesboro. During the first week, I sold 3 cars, personally washing each one. Some individuals quietly expressed amusement. At that time, I wasn't sure if I would succeed, but I possessed 2 valuable assets: my reputation and my commitment to honesty. I consistently ensured I could fulfill any promise made and avoided dishonesty when closing deals." The atmosphere in the room was now quiet. However, a significant shift has occurred, he continued. "This isn't limited to a single salesperson. It's about how we compromise on minor details and prioritize speed over customer care. We've begun to see individuals as sales goals, rather than human beings. That's not what I built. That's not who we are." He looked around the room. "If you've ever included an additional charge because you believed you could, if you've ever hurried a woman out the door because she didn't appear to be able to afford our services, if you've ever spoken condescendingly to someone simply because you were able, today marks a turning point." A few people visibly expressed discomfort. "You have a choice," he said. The situation demanded a resolution, either assistance or a new employment opportunity. Silence followed, then a voice spoke up. It was Trevor, Mr. Belton, and Derek turned to him. "Yeah," Trevor said, appearing nervous, but proceeding anyway. "What if some of us were performing well, but no one acknowledged it?" Derek smiled. "Then we need to start noticing. Starting today," he walked over and handed Trevor a small envelope. Inside was a letter of promotion, from lot attendant to junior sales associate, including full training and benefits. Trevor blinked. "Are you serious?" Derek stated, "Because the people who treat others with respect are the ones I want representing my name." Following the meeting, changes occurred rapidly. Brent's deals were reviewed. 5 of them necessitated full or partial refunds. Monique's case served as the focus of a training seminar. Every single manager was obligated to participate in a 3-week ethics and customer care workshop. Derek even re-engaged a retired employee. Arlene Cupp, a direct woman in her 60s who previously managed the front desk, had departed 2 years prior, citing a change in the atmosphere. She was now the new head of customer relations. Arlene's initial action involved installing a glass wall separating the sales desk and the finance office, ensuring transparency in all communications. Derek walked through the lot that Friday, observing the staff's interactions. A subtle shift permeated the atmosphere, not flawless, but calmer, more deliberate, stemming from understanding rather than apprehension. He observed a young salesperson patiently explaining trim-level differences to an older gentleman, ensuring he was heard. This detail, absent from any spreadsheet, held greater significance than any monthly performance goal. Arlene approached. It appears they recall their employer, she remarked, and rightfully so. Derek responded, stating he wasn't leaving, although one element remained. The core reason for this endeavor needed to be revisited. That Sunday morning, Derek was seated on the porch of his mother's former residence in Jackson, Tennessee. The sun had just begun to rise, and the air retained the stillness of the early hours. He took his coffee slowly, looking out at the yard he previously mowed every Saturday during his teenage years. Years had passed since her passing, yet the atmosphere of the place remained unchanged. Now, it belonged to him, recollection solidified in brick and wood. He retrieved a photograph from his jacket pocket, the image faded with curled edges. The picture showed him, no older than 10, standing next to his mother before a dull, rust-colored Oldsmobile. Her smile was broad and proud, not due to the car's newness as it wasn't, but because it was hers. That marked the day she purchased her first vehicle independently. He recalled how she, a nurse, managed without a cosigner or assistance, relying solely on her paycheck and a salesman who painstakingly explained each document before she signed. Derek remembered her meticulously verifying every detail. He remembered her asking questions, even when her voice wavered, and how the man behind the desk never made her feel inadequate for doing so. He remembered that. And now, decades later, he occupied the man's position behind the desk. He was the man whose name appeared above the showroom. He was the person who influenced every customer's experience upon entering. He looked at the picture once more. That instance profoundly impacted him, teaching him that dignity wasn't something acquired through wealth. It was something inherent, deserved simply by being present and making an effort. The world hadn't been kind to his mother, but on that day, she received recognition, and he carried that with him. Returning to the dealership the following week, Derek requested a new plaque be installed by the entrance. The message stated that we treat each customer as if they were purchasing their first car, demonstrating dignity, patience, and honesty. It wasn't intended for widespread attention or media coverage. The goal was for every employee to read it daily. Trevor read it every morning, first thing. Monique returned a month later to have her car serviced. She entered wearing a hoodie, holding her daughter, and smiled upon seeing Trevor at the desk. "You remember me?" she asked. He smiled in return. "Of course I do. We had her in that silver Corolla, correct?" She affirmed. "She's performing well." They continued their conversation briefly, covering minor details, and the interaction felt comfortable, because now it felt natural. Derek observed from his office, unnoticed, simply watching. He didn't require attention. He desired none. The focus wasn't on him. The purpose was this: you don't establish a successful business solely on profit. You build it on trust, on the manner in which you treat people when you believe no one is observing. He learned that from his mom. He communicated this to others via Brent. And now, with each handshake, each sale, each explanation provided without pressure or misleading information, he was restoring it. Incrementally, deliberately, that's what integrity truly represents. Not something asserted, something safeguarded. For once lost, regaining it demands all your resources. And Derek Belton refused to allow his reputation to signify anything other than honesty. If this story resonated with you personally, if it brought to mind a time you felt disregarded, or a time someone championed you when they weren't obligated to, please subscribe. We have more stories coming that speak to the heart, not just the headline. A judge chuckled upon hearing that 17-year-old Naomi was representing her cousin in court, but the entire courtroom fell silent by the time she concluded her statement. The courtroom held a subtle aroma of coffee and aged floor polish. Fluorescent lights hummed above as Naomi Ellison proceeded through the double doors, holding a substantial manila folder close. Her walk was determined, though it was evident she had practiced it before a mirror. Her thrift store slacks were a little too short, the white shirt just slightly wrinkled, and her bun, braided tight and pinned, had loosened a little in the Georgia humidity. Despite this, she kept her head high. 17 years old, not a lawyer, Not even a college student, she was present to defend her cousin, and she wasn't planning on being dismissed. It was late morning in the Berrien County Courthouse in Nashville, Georgia, a modest building where everyone knew everyone. This was not a courtroom known for dramatic proceedings. It typically handled minor traffic offenses, small claims, and occasional custody disputes. Judge Byron Talcott had served on the bench for almost 3 decades. People in town remarked that he seemed from an earlier era, a diplomatic way of noting his resistance to change and his limited acceptance of it within his courtroom. As Naomi announced her role as Deshaun Little's legal representative, Judge Talcott peered over his glasses, appearing bewildered. "You're what now?" he inquired, looking down at the docket. "I'm representing my cousin in this case," Naomi stated, her voice unwavering. "I prepared a written argument, and—" He interrupted her. "You're not a lawyer," he said, a slight laugh escaping his lips. A ripple of laughter spread through the courtroom. It seemed impossible that she was young enough to drive, let alone practice law. Several individuals adjusted their positions to observe her more closely. A man seated in the rear even smiled, seemingly anticipating an amusing spectacle. Naomi remained composed. Her expression didn't change, and her hands were steady. She nodded once, opened her documents, and stated, with respect, "Your Honor, Georgia law permits individuals to represent others in non-criminal proceedings, provided both parties agree." Judge Talcott raised an eyebrow. "And you're telling me he consents to this?" Deshaun, seated beside her in jeans and a t-shirt, leaned toward the microphone. "Yes, sir, I do." A subtle change permeated the atmosphere. Naomi cleared her throat and added, "I'm prepared to proceed if the court is willing." The judge reclined in his chair, pausing for an extended moment. Then he smirked and waved his hand dismissively. "Fine. This will be interesting." The bailiff, an older man named Wiggins, inclined himself forward a little, focusing his gaze on Naomi with a hint of curiosity rather than disapproval. Naomi organized her documents with precision. She positioned her handwritten notes before her, turning to the page marked Opening Statement. Her script was precise, so precise that it seemed impossible anyone could have written it hastily. As she prepared to speak, a laugh escaped someone situated in the back of the room. The judge made no move to quiet it, nor did Naomi. She simply commenced. Before she could elaborate further, the judge interrupted her once more. "Miss Ellison, for the sake of argument, could you please state where you obtained your law degree?" She met his gaze steadily. "I do not possess one, but I have dedicated the past 2 years to studying Georgia traffic law, civil procedure, and judicial conduct during my leisure time. I've attended public hearings in 3 counties, transcribed trial footage, and reviewed over 50 court opinions. I do not possess a degree, but I am present to ensure the court's time is used productively." The room was silent now. Even the clerk had ceased typing. However, Judge Talcott still had one more maneuver prepared. Judge Talcott exhaled audibly through his nose, seemingly considering whether this was a misuse of time or an opportunity for spectacle. He shifted slightly in his chair and offered Naomi a brief, dismissive gesture. "Very well, Miss Ellison." Naomi remained unfazed. She delivered her introduction with the confidence of someone who had rehearsed it repeatedly. And she had. In her bedroom, she practiced, standing before a mirror with her backpack used as a makeshift podium. Her voice remained steady as she presented the details. Deshaun had been stopped by police for failing to stop at a stop sign outside the high school on a Saturday morning. There was no other traffic and no pedestrians present. Despite this, the infraction resulted in a court summons and a significant financial penalty. Naomi's goal wasn't merely to dispute the fine. She aimed for its complete dismissal. In the second row, a white woman wearing a peach blazer spoke softly to the man beside her. He responded with a chuckle and a shake of his head. The clerk reclined in her chair, clicking her pen, anticipating Naomi's misstep. And Deshaun? He glanced at his hands, apprehensive, perhaps even a little irritated. "You sure you want to do this?" He had asked her that morning while they waited outside the courthouse. Naomi had answered without lifting her eyes from her notes. "I wouldn't be here if I wasn't." He remained silent after that. Now, seated beside her at the defendant's table, he fidgeted in his chair, seemingly wishing he could vanish. He was 17 as well, but Naomi made him feel even younger simply by being next to him. Naomi then addressed the matter of selective enforcement. The stop sign in question had been disregarded by numerous drivers that morning, including 2 local sheriff's deputies. Naomi possessed video footage captured by a neighbor, which was time-stamped and easily discernible. The footage displayed vehicles proceeding without interruption. There were no visible lights, no audible sirens, and no issued citations. She positioned a small USB drive on the table and raised her gaze toward the judge. With the court's permission, I'd like to submit this as evidence. Judge Talcott remained still for a moment. Then, deliberately, he turned his attention to the bailiff. Let's take a look. The screen activated. The courtroom's attention focused. The video consisted of straightforward street footage captured by a home security camera. Vehicle after vehicle passed the sign without pausing. Naomi allowed the recording to play for 20 seconds before stopping it and indicating a license plate belonging to a county sheriff. I'm not suggesting that the law shouldn't be enforced, she stated, only that it should be enforced fairly. There was no laughter this time. The judge, however, crossed his arms. And you believe this demonstrates your cousin was treated unfairly? Naomi replied concisely. It demonstrates that enforcement lacks consistency. And when enforcement lacks consistency, citations can become subjective. He observed her intently for a moment. Naomi remained composed under his gaze. What the majority of individuals present didn't realize, couldn't possibly know, was her dedication over the previous 2 summers, secretly attending hearings in 3 counties. She documented proceedings with a well-used pen, quietly reciting legal terminology into a tape recorder obtained from her science teacher. No one had instructed her in these actions. Her high school lacked law electives, and internship opportunities for girls like her were scarce in Berrien County. Consequently, she pursued self-study. She dedicated late nights to reading legal blogs and case opinions while her mom worked double shifts at the nursing home. She prioritized this over socializing, foregoing parties and school dances. It was her chosen path. Now, upon her first opportunity to apply her knowledge, those present perceived her as a young person pretending. I'll accept her. The judge cleared his throat. We'll admit the video for review. Continue. Naomi nodded and kept going, but the atmosphere hadn't changed yet. People still looked at her as if this would inevitably fail. But then Naomi said something that even made the court reporter lift her head. Naomi placed her palms flat on the table, leaned in just a little, and said, "This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about accountability. The question of whether authority figures, including officers, are held to the same standards as those they stop, that specific phrasing resonated powerfully. It didn't appear scripted, but its impact was undeniable. A noticeable silence fell over the room, unlike any that had come before. The murmuring ceased, and the expression softened. The clerk paused her pen-chewing habit. Even Judge Talcott reacted, seemingly surprised by her candid remark. Deshawn observed his cousin with a newfound perspective. He had always recognized her intelligence. Family members had expressed similar sentiments. However, this situation felt different. Naomi proceeded swiftly, turning to the subsequent page of her materials. Her notes were meticulously organized with a color-coded highlighting system. Blue indicated facts, green represented legal principles, and yellow marked quotes she had committed to memory. She began discussing Owens versus State of Georgia, a 1999 case concerning traffic enforcement and racial bias. She methodically reviewed the court's opinion, detailing it line by line, and clarified how the court recognized that unequal enforcement damaged public confidence. The judge intervened. "Ms. Ellison, are you drawing a comparison to the Owens case?" "That involved." She remained steady. "The relevant legal principles remain applicable, Your Honor. Selective enforcement compromises the fairness of any legal process, irrespective of whether it is criminal or civil." He reclined once more, his expression now neutral. The courtroom was fully engaged as well. The woman in the peach blazer now sat forward, resting her elbows on her knees, and intently listened. The man beside her put away his phone. Naomi proceeded. She presented traffic enforcement statistics from Willow Creek County, figures she had obtained via a Freedom of Information Act request and printed at the public library. The data revealed that 83% of traffic stops during the previous year involved black drivers, while census data indicated they comprised just under 40% of the population. She placed the documents before her. "I'm not suggesting anyone intentionally targeted my cousin," she stated. "The court is being asked to consider the established pattern. Ignoring patterns allows them to persist. This presentation is devoid of theatrics or raised voices. It is simply a recitation of facts and a quiet, direct assessment." Judge Talcott reviewed his notes, tapped his pen against the folder before him, then made a notation. The bailiff, Wiggins, folded his arms, not as an act of opposition, but in attentive listening. Deshawn murmured, "Yo, did you really obtain all those numbers?" Naomi murmured, her gaze fixed on the judge, "It took me 3 weeks." Deshawn blinked, surprised by the intensity of her statement. A cough echoed from a few rows behind. Yet no one chuckled. The judge remained silent, examining the printed documents before returning his attention to Naomi. "You've certainly done your homework, Miss Ellison," he observed. She offered a single nod, composed and prepared. Then, for the first time since she entered the courtroom, Naomi hesitated. The silence wasn't due to a lapse in her speech, but because she had arrived at the critical juncture of her argument. Her statement emphasized that the matter wasn't about achieving victory, it was about fairness. She affirmed that if the court found her cousin had indeed violated the law, they would abide by the decision. However, she insisted that if citations were to be issued in Cedar Creek County, they needed to carry consistent meaning regardless of the driver. This was the pivotal moment, not when she referenced legal precedent, nor when she presented the statistics. The sincerity of that statement seemed to resonate, and the judge closed his folder. "Let's take a 10-minute recess." Gasps weren't permitted in courtrooms, yet they were audible, noticeable in the subtle shifts of people and the murmured comment, "He never does that." During that brief pause, Naomi experienced her initial wave of genuine uncertainty. She sat on the unyielding wooden bench outside the courtroom, knees drawn close, hands tightly clasped around a bottle of water she hadn't opened. The braid at the nape of her neck was loosening, but she made no move to adjust it. She fixed her gaze straight ahead, seemingly observing something unseen by others. Deshawn sat next to her, his leg bouncing, his eyes darting frequently. "You good?" he eventually asked. She nodded, then murmured, "Yeah, but you don't seem it." A faint smile touched her lips. "I didn't come here to look good," he chuckled, then added more seriously, "Hey, thank you. For real. I didn't think you'd go that deep." She turned towards him. "You didn't think I meant it?" "I mean, I knew you were smart. I simply didn't realize you were this intelligent." Naomi did not respond. The courtroom door opened, and the bailiff motioned toward them. "Let's return to the matter at hand." Inside, the atmosphere had changed. The laughter from before had disappeared, yielding to a more subdued feeling. It wasn't quite respect. It wasn't quite admiration. It was simply focused attention. Judge Talcott observed Naomi when she re-entered. This time, he didn't squint or smirk. He continued to evaluate her. "Miss Ellison," he stated as she resumed her testimony, "let's hypothetically consider, just for a moment, that your assertion is valid. Could you please reference any specific wording in the law that would directly justify dismissing your cousin's citation?" Naomi responded promptly. "Yes, sir. Georgia Code, Section 40 to 620 details proper stop sign enforcement, but it also allows for interpretation regarding situations where enforcement might be applied unevenly or selectively. Moreover, the Equal Protection Clause, as defined in Yick Wo v. Hopkins, dictates that selective enforcement predicated on arbitrary distinctions compromises the law's legitimacy." The courtroom fell silent once more. The judge inclined himself forward, resting his elbows on his desk, observing her as if searching for a weakness. "I notice you're quite well informed," he remarked. "Yes, Your Honor." He then stated, his voice a little more pointed, that if she intended to cite Yikwa, she should also be ready to discuss its relevance beyond licensing matters. She affirmed, explaining that the ruling's core principle extended beyond licenses. It concerned fairness under the law. The ruling explicitly stated that even seemingly neutral laws could not be applied in a discriminatory manner. For the first time, Judge Talcott refrained from interrupting, allowing her to complete her statement. He then folded his hands and looked directly at her. "Miss Ellison," he said, speaking almost calmly now, "what exactly do you want from this court?" Naomi took a breath. "I want my cousin's citation dismissed, and I want the court to acknowledge that enforcement patterns in this county deserve closer scrutiny." She didn't yell. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The judge examined the documents before him, then surveyed the courtroom, and lastly turned his gaze to Naomi. Unexpectedly, he posed a question. "May I review your notes?" Naomi was taken aback. "I'm sorry," he repeated. "Your notes. It's evident you've invested significant effort. I'd appreciate the opportunity to examine them." The inquiry was unusual. Judges rarely made such requests. Naomi approached and presented the notes. Her hand briefly touched the bench, but she maintained her balance. The judge examined the pages, methodically, handwritten, color-coded, and arranged with the precision of a junior associate at a leading downtown Atlanta firm. "This is remarkable," he stated after a prolonged pause. The courtroom remained silent. He then added, "However, you must understand that argument isn't always sufficient in court. Sometimes, regardless of how just you are, the structure doesn't yield." Naomi did not avert her gaze. "Then perhaps the structure requires pressure." The judge raised an eyebrow, but before he could respond, someone in the gallery stood. The woman who stood in the back row appeared to be in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back tightly and a black blouse buttoned to the neck. She seemed like someone who didn't speak unless it was important. "Your Honor," she called out, her voice steady but quiet. Judge Talcott turned slowly. "Ma'am, you need to sit down. This isn't open for public comment." But the woman did not flinch. "I am Judith Minter. As a retired attorney with 41 years of experience in civil litigation, I feel compelled to state, for the record, that this young lady presented one of the most well-structured arguments I've observed in a courtroom, even among federal proceedings." While gasps weren't permitted, an audible intake of breath was clearly heard from half the gallery. Judge Talcott visibly stiffened but remained silent, simply observing Naomi. A fleeting, unreadable expression crossed his face. Frustration? Perhaps. Or something else entirely. He announced another recess. Naomi hurried outside. Her chest felt constricted, and her hands trembled slightly this time. Not from fear, but from the weight of everything. The room, the atmosphere, the abrupt quiet that followed the woman's statement. Deshawn followed her and sat next to her once more. "You all right?" he inquired. She hesitated before responding. Her fingers moved restlessly in her lap. Why would she say that? Naomi asked, almost to herself. Why would someone like her defend me? Deshawn shrugged, because she observed what everyone else had seen. Naomi allowed her shoulders to relax a little. Her entire body had been rigid for more than an hour, and she hadn't been aware of it. The courtroom doors opened again, and Naomi was surprised when Judith Minter emerged and approached her. "Miss Ellison," she said softly as she sat down next to her on the bench. "Do you understand the sort of bravery it requires to stand where you just stood, particularly without the qualifications? That's not something that can be fabricated." Naomi began to speak, but Judith raised a hand. "I'm not attempting to compliment you," she said. "I'm stating a fact. And if you ever consider a career in law, I mean professionally, please contact me. I know individuals who would be fortunate to guide someone with your potential." Naomi paused, unsure how to respond. All she could say was, "Thank you." Judith smiled, then rose. "Finish well. Don't allow him to manipulate you. He possesses more intelligence than he conveys, but he's likely to show you deference if you remain perceptive." Following that, the woman vanished down the hallway, her heels clicking softly against the tile. Deshawn turned to Naomi, a combination of awe and disbelief evident on his face. Yo, who are you right now? She offered a quiet, almost weary laugh. I'm just me. However, something in her demeanor had shifted. The anxiety was still present, but it no longer dominated. Not entirely. The bailiff entered the room. They're ready. Naomi stood, adjusted her shirt, and retrieved her folder. As she re-entered the courtroom, there were no whispers, no smirks, and Judge Talcott no longer leaned back as if dismissing her. Instead, he leaned forward. Naomi returned to the table, arranged her closing statement, and awaited approval. The judge offered a brief nod. Proceed. She took a final breath to compose herself, and then she began. The words she was about to speak would silence the entire courtroom. Naomi spoke calmly, no need for raised tones. My cousin is a teenager. He committed a minor error. But if the law isn't applied equally to all, young, old, black, white, officer, civilian, then it ceases to be law. It transforms into a suggestion, or, even more detrimentally, punishment for some and a caution for others. A stillness fell over the room. No one moved. Every gaze in that room was focused on her. Even the clerk, who had kept her fingers poised over the keyboard, was frozen midair. She continued, "We've all heard that justice is blind, but it shouldn't be deaf. It shouldn't ignore patterns, or silence people who speak up about them." Naomi walked slowly to the evidence table, pulled up the citation, and held it out. This citation isn't just about a stop sign. It's about the choice to enforce, or not enforce, the law based on who's in the driver's seat. Her voice remained steady, almost calm, but her words carried significant weight. She addressed the judge. You inquired previously about what I sought from this court. I stated then that I desired the citation dismissed, and I maintain that desire. However, I also want recognition that fairness should not be something earned through appearances or background. It should be inherent, a given, for all. Judge Talcott looked down, tapping the citation folder again with the corner of his pen. He remained silent. Not yet. I may not hold a degree, Naomi stated, but I've gained knowledge observing courtrooms and opinions and law books over the past 2 years. I've learned that when justice functions correctly, it isn't felt as dominance. It feels like understanding, like recognition that you were listened to. Her voice faltered just a little at that final word. Not enough to disrupt her flow, but enough to serve as a reminder to those present that she remained a teenager. Still human. Still someone who shouldn't have been required to prepare for this. She closed her folder and stepped back. Silence. A full 10 seconds elapsed before Judge Talcott finally exhaled. He adjusted his glasses, surveyed the courtroom, then focused his eyes on Naomi. I've been doing this for a long time, he said. Long enough to recognize when someone enters this courtroom with something prepared, and when they enter with something authentic. He paused. You, Miss Ellison, you presented something authentic. Another pause. I am dismissing the citation. The issue isn't related to your cousin's connections, but rather the manner in which you presented this case. Furthermore, the evidence you offered prompted questions that this court cannot disregard. A murmur arose within the gallery, marked by surprise, quietness, and deference, yet he had not concluded. Judge Talcott moved forward, placing his hands on the desk. To be candid, I initially found amusement in your presentation, and that was an error. You didn't simply prepare, you informed this courtroom, and myself included. You maintained your position in a setting not intended for someone of your stature to speak with authority. And I believe this will not be the last instance he tapped the gavel once. Not forcefully, simply to conclude proceedings. Court is adjourned. Naomi remained still initially. Deshawn observed her as if she were an unfamiliar person. Or perhaps he was at long last perceiving the version of her that had always existed. Those present in the gallery did not immediately leave. Several approached her discreetly. The clerk even nodded once, murmuring, "Nice work, kid." Naomi held her folder close to her chest again. But now it didn't seem like a shield. It felt like a credential. As she and Deshawn walked out into the sun, he nudged her. "You're going to be on somebody's billboard one day." She laughed. "Not unless they catch me on a good hair day." He smiled wide. "Nah, I mean it. You changed something in there." Naomi looked ahead at the street, eyes squinting against the light. "I hope so." What followed would demonstrate that this instance marked merely the commencement of events. A week later, Naomi found herself once again in her bedroom, amidst piles of notebooks, scattered pens, and her aged school laptop adorned with discolored stickers. Her triumph at the courthouse had been reported in the local news. It wasn't extensive coverage, simply a few brief mentions in the Nashville Herald and a Facebook post from an individual who had been present in the gallery. However, the phone call that fundamentally altered the situation did not originate from a journalist. The call originated from the office of attorney Roland Brewster, located in Macon. She nearly ignored it, as the phone number was unknown and her mom had cautioned her against answering unrecognized calls. However, an intuition prompted her to answer. "Is this Naomi Ellison?" A voice inquired. "Yes," she replied. "This is Angela from the office of Roland Brewster. He would like to speak with you, if you're available." Naomi straightened on the bed. Certainly?" A click was heard. A man's voice then spoke, warm yet straightforward. "Naomi, my name is Roland. I've been practicing law in Georgia for 27 years. A colleague of mine, Judith Minter, sent me a copy of your court presentation. She said I'd be a fool not to reach out." Naomi remained silent initially, not due to nerves, as she wasn't feeling them. She was simply uncertain if it was genuine. "I want to offer you something," he continued. "It's not a job, yet, but it's a mentorship, one that could develop into something further. There's a summer program designed for young, creative thinkers. We want you to be a part of it." She discovered her ability to speak up. "But I haven't started college yet. I haven't even finished high school." He chuckled. "That's not important. We're not seeking degrees. We're looking for minds capable of sparking change." Naomi looked at her notes. The same ones she'd used in court, now spread across her desk like discarded awards. "I'm intrigued," she said. "Excellent," Brewster replied. "Please send me a copy of that argument." Following the call, Naomi remained still for an extended period. She didn't move or smile, simply taking everything in. A change had occurred. The courtroom proceedings were over. However, her personal journey, that unconventional path she had constructed independently, using library books and YouTube lectures, was no longer hidden. Her mom entered the room. "Are you hungry?" she inquired. Naomi nodded, feeling ravenous. Sitting opposite each other at the small kitchen table, her mom inquired, "Do you truly desire to pursue this law? Seriously?" Naomi ate her sandwich deliberately, then responded, "Yes. I believe I already am." Her mom offered a look, a drawn-out, probing expression unique to mothers, and then nodded once. Following this, she stated, "Then you better continue demonstrating your capabilities." That evening, Naomi remained up reading, driven not by obligation, but by a sense of purpose. Analyzing legal precedent felt less like an assignment and more like a language she was finally proficient in. The following morning, she received another call, this time from a high school student from 2 towns over. "Hey," the girl said, "I saw what you did. My brother's case is similar. I don't know where to begin. Could I ask you a question?" And with that, Naomi evolved into something more, not just a bright student, not just a relative advocating for family. She stood as an illustration, a demonstration that excellence doesn't await authorization, and fairness doesn't demand a position, but only truth, clarity, and the courage to speak. She didn't require a law degree to impact a courtroom. She simply needed an opportunity. And when she received it, she ensured no one would ever perceive her identically again. Your voice doesn't need a platform. It merely needs to be heard. If Naomi's story resonated with you, ensure you subscribe and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded. The key isn't the origin, but the level of dedication you demonstrate.